Every Thursday, let's get skin to it with dermatologist Dr. Sandy Skotnicki and personal stylist and beauty enthusiast Marlo Sutton for a new episode of Skin to It, where we guide you through the maze of skincare and cut through that noise to help you achieve your healthiest skin. Skin to It, a podcast brought to you by Bioderma. Welcome to Skin to It, your guide to healthy skin. I'm Dr. Sandy Skotnicki, board-certified dermatologist.
And I'm Marlo Sutton, personal stylist and beauty enthusiast.
So Marla, what's new? I noticed we both have our power rings on here from Haley Rocks.
Yeah. I know you can't see them, but they're really beautiful.
Oh, yeah, that's right. I always forget about that.
And we're both wearing like really kind of chic, crisp shirts. Cotton shirts. Yeah,
that's good.
I like it. I think we're looking ready. We're looking ready for this episode anyway. So on today's episode, we're going to talk about the new changes coming to skincare regulation in Canada and the US, and what you need to know as a consumer person, as anyone who buys any type of product at all.
We're going to have some really interesting stories surrounding that too.
Yes.
So I think before we get into the changes, I think we should talk about who actually regulates skincare. We're going to start with Canada. So in Canada, skincare is regulated by the Cosmetic regulations and the Food and Drug Act.
So is that similar to the FDA?
Yeah, so it's called FDA here as well, but where a lot of it comes from is this, it's called Cosmetic regulations in Canada. And you know, one of the interesting thing when I was prepping for this, I was reading in depth, and Section 16 of this Food and Drug Act states that cosmetics manufactured or imported for sale in Canada must be safe to use.
I know, it's like no
beep. Do they have to write that down? Like, shouldn't that be inherent? But you know what? You have to write that down.
Yeah.
And it wasn't even written down in the US. We're going to get to that.
Okay.
So the other part of this Food and Drug Act, if you will, cosmetics and products that are sold in Canada must be manufactured, prepared, preserved, packed under sanitary conditions. Again, you'd think that'd be obvious.
You think that would be obvious.
And the manufacturer and importer must provide a list of ingredients and notify Health Canada when they're selling it. And I want to stop there on, they have to provide a list of ingredients. Do you know that in the last significant amendment to the cosmetic regulations in Canada was 2006. And you know what they did then? Was they actually, and my mentor, Dr. Melanie Pratt, who taught me all about contact dermatitis, was instrumental in having this happen. Before 2006 in Canada, ingredients did not have to be put on cosmetic packaging. Isn't that crazy? Yeah. It's like less than 20 years ago. And by the way, it's still the case for household products. You do not have to put, manufacturers do not have to put the ingredients on a household product. Like that includes detergent and sprays. And
yeah, I mean, I can't even imagine. We've all become so conscious, of what we're using, and more we know certain ingredients and products that are really dangerous.
Well, I think I have a good case. Like we were trying to make it less, because this is a bit of a heavier topic, like have some fun stories. So
fun. No, Sandy's version of fun sometimes. Yeah. Very interesting stories.
Interesting cases.
Kind of weird and crazy.
So this is a very weird and crazy story. So this is about the lack of transparency of ingredients on household products, which include detergent. So I had a fellow come to my contact dermatitis clinic, and he said, I'm allergic to my ski socks. And I was always listen, and I go, that's pretty difficult, but let's check it out. So I patch tested him, which is allergy testing to ingredients that touch the skin. We put it on the back.
It's tell the listeners what it looked like.
Oh, right. So he showed these pictures and on his shins and he would only get it when he skied.
So strange.
So, and on his shin, he had these like linear horizontal lines of blisters, and you could see it was where this sock mark was. Anyway, so I allergy test him. And again, listeners, this is patch testing on the back for things that touch you. It's not prick testing to like things you inhale or ingest. That's called prick testing. So he came up to this chemical that we've talked about before called methyl isothiazolone, which is a preservative. And it was in his detergent. And when he skied, he sweat, and the pressure from the boot leached it out of the sock and went onto his skin. But the crazy part was, I said, what do you wash your clothes with? And he said, I wash with this detergent. And he actually, because it's not on the label, he called the company numerous times. It took him months, and they finally relented and said, yes, there's methyl isothiazolone in the detergent. So interesting.
5 times fast.
Interesting.
Methyl
isothiazolone.
Right. What she said.
Yeah.
Okay, so I know we talked about the hot list before. We've had this conversation. Can you explain to our listeners what it is, what it does, and why, as consumers, we should know about it?
Okay, so if we go back to who regulates the regulations in Canada, that is the cosmetic regulations of the Food and Drug Act. So within the cosmetic regulations, there's an incredible tool. It's a working administrative document that Health Canada uses to communicate to manufacturers and the public what ingredients are restricted or banned. And the nice thing about this is that it's always evolving. Remember, we were talking about how hard it is to pass law, and because you've got to go through Congress or the government. This is the Health Canada says this is a problem. They put it on the hot list, and that's it. That's it. It has to be followed.
Has there ever, so I know you were saying that it's dermatologists. So you, for example, could could send them an ingredient that you think should be on the hot list.
It's not that easy. We can, but there is, so I am a member of what's called the Skin Health Program, which is a board within the Canadian Dermatology Association.
Okay.
So we basically help look at what ingredients in skincare are problematic. So what's wonderful is Health Canada comes to us and says, what do you think about methyl isothiazolone? And we're like, well, it needs to be regulated. So the hot list, they basically said, okay, we're going to add methyl isothiazolone to the prohibited list, not banned, but the regulations for the concentration.
The concentration of
So,
it, right?
yeah.
And are there ever products that go on the list that end up being studied and come up realizing that they're safe? Or
it's not so much that it's hard to get something on the list. Like, you have to have a lot of data to show.
Okay.
And there's another agency too that I wanted to bring up, which is the Canadian Environmental Protection Act. It's sort of an act, but they protect Canadians, they protect the environment of Canada and the human health. And they are the ones that actually brought up this problem with fragrance, which is one of the things we're going to talk about.
Yeah.
And so then they are in communication with the Food and Drug Act. And so there's a lot of things being discussed before something gets put on a list.
I understand. Okay.
Yeah.
And as a consumer, can I Google
Sure can.
hot list and it comes up? So it'll say the ingredient that's either banned or
regulated.
Somehow regulated where it can only, and then you can, so now if I see I can't say it.
It's okay. Just say MI. It's short for it, MI.
Okay. If I see MI on that list, but it said, let's say it can have a concentrate of 2%. So I can look in product.
No, you can't. So if something is sold in Canada,
yeah,
and they want to use methyl isothiazolone as a preservative, they have to not exceed 0.0015% in a wash-off product, and they cannot put it in a leave-on product. So there was a very popular sunscreen brand that had methyl isothiazolone in it, and we lobbied the company to have it removed. And they did, because Canada ended up banning it. We can't leave it in a. So one of the things is, how can this help consumers is when we identify an issue in the world, like MI became a problem all over the world. And I want to talk about actually why.
Okay. So what does MI do?
So MI is a preservative.
Okay.
So what happened is parabens started to have a lot of negative press, and some of it definitely warranted. We need a different episode on parabens, but I'll just say in a couple sentences that there's 12 different paraben preservatives. There's not one. Mm-hmm. Some of them are very problematic. They bind estrogen. They're estrogen receptor. They mimic, and they can disrupt that part of the hormone disruption. Yeah. But the two that are still, I think it's 2 or 3 that are still available, do not bind estrogen very strongly at all. And their percentages are rigorously, you can't use high percentages.
And is paraben a preservative?
It's a preservative. So I apologize. I should have said that. So what happened is even though a lot of us know that there are certain parabens that are not as problematic, the public doesn't want it.
Right.
So companies
that's why on sunscreen bottles, it's often no parabens.
Right.
No parabens.
So in the court of public opinion, parabens are out. Doesn't really matter about the science anymore, because they're just not going to be used. So what happened, though, is companies have to preserve their products with something. Mm-hmm. So then they started to use more of this methyl isothiazolone, MI. And they started to use it in higher concentrations because they couldn't use parabens. So they actually produced another huge problem. I saw people covered in head to toe, scabbing, dermatitis, not realizing it was their body wash and their shampoo. And I still see them periodically. And then, of course, this guy with the socks.
Right.
So it
But
was in
if
his
it's your
laundry.
right, but you would know if it was in your well, now it's banned. You back then, I guess you wouldn't have
Well, you knew it
known.
was there, but we didn't know
We
that it
didn't
was
know
such a
what it was
problem because the
causing.
concentration was not restricted. Now,
Now it is,
so
I
the
understand.
so we realize there's a problem. We go to Health Canada. They go, okay, we're going to put it on the hot list, and it's restricted. They cannot use it in this concentration, and they can't put it in leave-on products. So that's the beauty of this constant working document, the hot list. It's great.
That's amazing. So let's change now to the US. So I understand that they finally updated their regulations. And I think you told me that it was last updated in 1938.
38, yeah. So let's talk about that. So the cosmetics and skincare is regulated in the U.S. by the Food and Drug or the FDA. I think everybody knows that. And in 1938, so this is when it was first the act was first written up.
Mhm.
And at that point, the act left the regulation of cosmetics to the companies with very little oversight from the government. And that's how it was written. And it only changed. Remember, we talked about how difficult it is to sometimes pass laws.
Sure.
So in December 2022, the Modernization of Cosmetic Regulation Act was passed in Congress in the US, but it only came into law in December 2023. And what is that act? It's very basic because remember before the FDA really didn't have a lot of power.
Authority, yeah.
So this act basically says, amongst other things, I didn't go into huge detail, but look at how basic this is. The FDA can require a cosmetic company to register its facility,
Mhm.
report serious adverse events, impose record keeping obligations. The FDA can now recall a cosmetic product. They had no power to do that before,
Mhm.
and establish good manufacturing practices, which is what we were talking about, sterility and that is safe. And like these things aren't written down, companies actually don't have to comply. And it's crazy that this wasn't like this in the past.
Earlier.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's crazy. So if it was regulated or left to the cosmetic industry, like how is that actually working?
Well, I think some of that is still ongoing because I don't know all the ins and outs of this Modernization Act. I mean, it's the first step forward in this kind of legislation, but there's an agency in the US called the Cosmetic Ingredient Review, the CIR, and they do an in-depth analysis of different ingredients. Like let's take coal tar, for instance, right? They'll study it, they'll make a statement. The
Mhm.
problem with the CIR, in the way I look at it, and I'm not the only one, is they are basically funded by the cosmetic industry. So they are funded by the personal care industry. Now they say if you read online, they're totally separate and they do their own procedure. I to a certain extent, but the bigger problem is they would come up maybe with a recommendation on an ingredient, but because it doesn't have to be enforced, it's not
Right.
law.
Right.
This is a recommendation to the personal care industry, which is, by the way, paying them. So yeah, I don't know how all of that's gonna roll out with this new Modernization Act. The point is now the FDA has some leverage, and I already saw it. When I was reading for this that, I think we might be getting off track a little bit, but there's this ingredient or a type of ingredient called per and polyfluoroalkyl substances,
Mhm.
and I think we talked a little bit about this in clean beauty. These are substances that are in skincare, but in industry, in like your Teflon on your
Pans.
pan.
Okay.
And these are considered to be associated possibly with cancer and immune dysfunction. And so the FDA now has collected 570 cosmetic products looking for the presence of these polyfluoroalkyl substances, and they may actually make a recommendation.
Right.
Whereas before, they wouldn't be able to do that. And so it's an interesting development. I think it's a development in the right direction.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So and do we have something that's similar in Canada?
So Canada, we have the Cosmetic Alliance, which is funded by the beauty trade, the beauty industry. They don't they make recommendations. They're more of they represent the beauty industry. But what I'm part of, which I already mentioned, is a skin health program, which is part of the Canadian Dermatology Association. And we are in conversation with the Health Canada when they have a question like, am I a problem? Like, do we
Right.
need to look at fragrance labeling? So we're going to talk about that.
Okay. So this is it's so interesting. So you were saying earlier that most companies, like big cosmetic companies and dermatologists, look to the EU for cosmetic safety. Can you explain that? And I mean, I think there's a lot of focus on the European cosmetic brands. And
Well, if you want to sell something in Europe, if you're Canadian or an American national, like big company, you have to comply with the European guidelines. And and so does Apple. Apple started to comply with their nickel directives in their phones and their iPads and stuff like that. So
which are a lot more strict and stringent. Right?
Yeah,
we're going to talk.
We're going to talk a little bit about that. So the EU has this independent review group of scientists called the Scientific Committee on Consumer Safety. And this is an independent committee of 17 scientists who basically will answer a question that the European Commission asks of them. They are not paid by any cosmetic company. They are completely independent. They actually don't get paid anything. They get paid for their travel. And so the director for health and consumer protection that works under the European Commission may say, hey, can you give us a statement on the essential oils in beauty products? We need to have safety parameters. But the great thing about this is, so they make an opinion, which can take years, because they also, when they make an opinion, they open it up to companies to just give their 2 cents. Well, I don't agree with this. I don't like this. I think this toxicologist was wrong, whatever. They have a discussion. But then at the end, whatever comes up is then put into law.
Wow.
So it's not like in the US where it's an opinion, but it doesn't necessarily have to be followed. In Canada, we have the hot list. I should say that I think there's just over 500 chemicals on the hot list that are banned or regulated. And then in the European Union, it's 1,300.
1,300. Wow, that's huge difference. So you would probably say that the European way of doing it is like the gold standard. Well, what we're hoping that the rest of the world will kind of follow in those footsteps.
We kind of do. And part of that
in Canada.
Well, Canada looks to that a little bit too, because the changes in the Canadian regulations, which we're going to get to next, are coming from the Europeans. And I just want to mention that we talked a little bit about the politics, but and again, I'm not a politician, but in the US, if you want something to change, it has to be passed through Congress. And, if you have that, this is why it took from 1938 to 2022 to change the regulation, because lobby groups can block these things. Like companies didn't want to be told what they could and couldn't do
put in their products, right? Well, amazing. So why don't you tell us about the new regulations that will be coming to Canada,
right?
How they're seemingly similar to what's happening in the
and why it's so important.
Sure.
So basically, it's all surrounding fragrance labeling. So I think because we've talked about it, but probably a lot of the listeners don't know. When you pick up a product and you see fragrance or perfume on the bottle, you actually don't, that's not one ingredient. You actually don't know what's in there. It's what we call a placeholder. So, and it was the Canadian Environmental Protection Group that first pointed out that consumers, for their health, need to know what's in that fragrance. Now, the pushback from industry was, well, this is a proprietary scent. I mean, what makes Chanel smell like Chanel? We're not going to tell everybody. They're going to copy it.
Well,
so
yeah.
So that was their pushback, but it's not that we don't want the whole ingredient. So the European Union and the group that I belong to, the American Contact Dermatitis Group, I have identified certain fragrance molecules that are more problematic mostly from an allergy point of view. And then there's essential oils where hidden inside the essential oil, by the way, essential oil is a mixture of 50 to 100 chemicals. It's not one thing. So hidden inside, like ylang ylang or lavender, is a fragrance molecule called geranol, right? And so that is that you can't hide it inside that. So
and this obviously becomes problematic for people who could be allergic to any
people who are allergic, who
are in their highly essential oils, as we talked about, can be highly.
Well, they can be. There's ingredients inside them that can be. Right. So the changes in the legislation were basically there was 26 fragrance allergens that were identified, and the European Union basically said back in, I think it was 1996, is how long ago they did it. If you want to put one of those 26 inside your fragrance, you have to put it on the label so the consumer knows.
Right.
So you don't have to put the whole fragrance, you have to put the problematic ones.
Oh, interesting. So you and I were talking earlier about the difference between, which I didn't realize, but I think I understand now, between unscented and fragrance-free. So from what I understand is it can say unscented, but unscented could mean it could have an ingredient in there that's actually masking the scent.
Right.
The natural scent.
Well, some things can smell really medicinal, like, it doesn't have a nice smell. So they put a masking scent and they say it's fragrance free.
Well, they say
it's unscented. Yeah.
But fragrance free means that it's actually has no fragrance to it.
But having said that,
Fragrance molecules.
no fragrance molecules.
Said that, yes.
Well, there's a work around that, which is a bit of a problem. And I'll give you an example. So we already said that. Let's take lavender essential oil. Inside lavender essential oil is something called linalool and limonene. Those are fragrance molecules. They're terpene fragrances. If you put lavender on, you can go to a health food store right now, get a shampoo, it says fragrance free on it, and it has lavender essential oil in it. So it's not fragrance free.
Right.
Because the fragrance molecules are inside the essential oil. So with these new regulations, if a company wants to put an essential oil on a product, and that's fine, because a lot of people don't have problems with them, you still have to put in at the bottom of the label the fragrance molecules that are hidden inside the essential oil. Okay. So it's helpful for consumers who are allergic. And it's just, we need more transparency.
Right.
Yeah.
So I find this really interesting. So I wanted to ask you the question. We had our whole episode about clean beauty. Mm-hmm. And from the clean beauty episode, you mentioned cancer causing and endocrine disruptors.
Very good.
And so my question is if Canada is actually regulating those, because there's one thing for, some people to be allergic to something, but then it's a whole different thing if it's cancer causing or if it's disrupting your the endocrine.
So I went and rechecked all of this. And so good news, in Canada and the EU, the main cancer causing ingredients in skincare and personal care is formaldehyde, coal tar, benzene, which is a breakdown product, by the way. We'll get into that a little bit. Untreated mineral oil, heavy metals, and something called 1,4-dioxane, which is a breakdown product, again, from these things. You often see PEGs, PEGs in your products. Those are polyethylene glycol. And then, of course, this new category we talked about, the polyfluoroalkyl substances. So everything with the exception of formaldehyde is banned in Canada. It's on that. If you go on the hot list, you'll see all of them in the hot list. You cannot use them. The issue with some of them is they're breakdown products.
And formaldehyde is still included, but is it regulated?
So this is percentage? So two things about formaldehyde. Number one, it's being phased out. So formaldehyde in and of itself is considered a cancer-causing chemical. Okay. So nobody puts straight up formaldehyde in a product. They use something called formaldehyde-releasing preservatives. So they slowly release preservative in the product, and the formaldehyde acts as a preservative. Mm-hmm. Now, this isn't regulated in Canada because you can't determine the percentage of how much is released. It's hard to even quantify that. Okay. But the EU in 2026 is going to ask for percentages of formaldehyde as a breakdown in their product for consumers. So
what are we using instead of formaldehyde? What is preserving our?
So again, we're having problems with finding, because we can't use parabens. Right. The restriction of MI is you can still use methyl isothiazolone, but in low concentrations. Nobody wants to use formaldehyde preservatives anymore because consumers don't want it. Mm-hmm. And I think it's probably a good thing. Formaldehyde's a cancer causing. Why would we use it in skincare? So there are some a lot of research is going into this. There's one called caprol glycol. There's different ones. And like phenoxyethanol is another one that sometimes gets a bad rap, but I don't think it's too bad. And then you can you have to look at novel approaches. We can lower the pH of a product to preserve it. We can use some bacterial things. And I meant to read about all this, but I ran out of steam.
Are you keeping the products in our fridge?
Well, preserve them? Those fridge, the things that are in there.
Beauty fridges?
Yeah, maybe there's something to put your benzoyl peroxide in there. Actually, we need to talk about that.
Yes, we do. And we also want to talk about, we talked a lot about clickbait and this fear mongering. And I think, that's why I think Sandy was adamant about doing this episode, because there's a lot of information out there and a lot of misinformation.
And sometimes distributed in a very, I would say, unprofessional. Let's get some more followers on my Instagram site to try to, in fear mongering headlines. So let's talk about the whole benzene thing. You sent me, did I send it to you or you sent it to me?
I think you sent it to me and you commented on it because the person was giving out misinformation about something that was in a product.
It wasn't misinformation. It was the way she said, so don't buy this, it's cancer causing. Okay, so this was about the benzene. And if anybody who has not up on their TikTok with the skin ingredients, there is a pharmaceutical company called Valisure in the US that put out a study showing that benzoyl peroxide, which is a common acne ingredient, will degrade into benzene, which is a cancer causing. We know this. It's not supposed to be in skincare. Benzene comes from the exhaust of cars, right?
So benzoyl peroxide is okay, but when it degrades,
it goes into benzene. So we've known this.
How does it degrade?
So it degrades over time, but in heat, it seems to degrade higher. So this company they did a couple different experiments. One was at 158 degrees Fahrenheit. That's like a hot car in the middle of the day in Florida. And they looked at it. I think they kept it in there for 17 hours. And then they said, listen, there's like 1,200 times benzene that should be in there. That's not realistic. The regulation for pharmacy testing is 40 degrees. And then
Celsius. Can we talk in Celsius here?
Well, this is American. This is coming from an American story.
Study.
Yeah. And then they did another test at 104 degrees, which they said was like a hot bathroom. Fahrenheit. Sorry. So the bottom line here is benzene is not supposed to be in skincare. Yes, benzoyl peroxide can degrade. I don't think anybody's using their products after it's been in a car, or I'm not sure about the hot bathroom.
But it's also that, I mean, does it say, it probably says on the package to keep it in like a cool, dry place. Quite often it will.
Not really, because the pharmacy regulations for testing is 40 degrees Fahrenheit.
Right.
Okay, so they tested it way over that. The bottom line is there's lots of options for acne. If you're really that concerned, don't use benzoyl peroxide or keep it in the fridge. I think this is, again, a lot of fear mongering.
Right. But and they also do have expiry dates, so you should.
That's right.
Adhere to those.
And that's a good point. That was one of the things the pharmacist, the testing facility said, if you have a benzoyl peroxide product for 10 years, we want to know how much benzene is in 10 years, or the end of the expiry, let's say.
Right.
So if we heat it, we get to those same results as if it was still on the shelf for all those years. I don't know that is completely true. I'm not a toxicologist. The problem with this is that for somebody, an influencer, to go on and say, this is going to give you cancer is irresponsible. I'm sorry. It is the problem with this kind of misinformation. It's a nuanced discussion. That's partly why I want to do this podcast. You cannot take a clickbait headline just for granted. You have to dig into it a little bit more. And it's troublesome.
Yeah. So Sandy, let's move on to a different type of product.
Okay.
We want to talk about nickel, and you had a story.
Mm-hmm.
There's a couple stories you were going to tell us.
Well, we sort of end off here. This isn't cosmetic regulation, but I think it's very important to also understand why these things need to be regulated. So I had a patient come to me. I was in my patch test allergy clinic, and she needed to get what's called an emplaster, which is this looks like a little umbrella. It goes into the heart. And she had what's called a patent ductus arteriosus, which is a hole in the heart. Okay. So you put it through, and the umbrella goes and pulls back, and you clog the hole. Now, the problem is she was very well known to be allergic to nickel. So nickel is a cheap metal. It comes from the Earth's crust. It's about 19% of North Americans are allergic in the patch test population, not all of Americans, but it's very high. You can get allergic by piercing.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Like ear piercing.
Ear piercing. And so, the problem with this whole thing is that it's not an issue if can't wear your earrings or you got a problem with your snaps from your bra. But when you need a prosthetic put into you, if you're nickel allergic, it's an issue. So she had to make a choice between, and she wanted me to tell her which one to pick. And I patch tested her, and she was very allergic to nickel. And the one that they could put in through open heart surgery had no nickel.
Right.
The one that went through her femoral vein, which is a big vein in your leg, had nickel.
So much easier, obviously. Operation.
Yeah. And so which one should I use? Because I'm allergic to nickel. I said, first of all, I can't answer that question, because the problem with nickel allergy is that nickel allergy on the skin doesn't always predict of a problem internally. Because if you look at all the studies, and there's been many, many studies, somebody could be very allergic to nickel, get a knee replacement and have absolutely no problem. The next person could be allergic to nickel and have a problem. So we can't predict. Bottom line is, if somebody's allergic to nickel these days, we tell them to use titanium. But in her case, she didn't have an option. I actually don't know what happened. I just said, I'm going to have to leave it up to you. So the issue was is that some of these people that are allergic to nickel, their heart could stop from that amphoas. Yeah. So what is the whole point of this story? So in the good old European Union in 1994, they started something called the Nickel Directive. So if you want to use nickel for your earring posts, or you want to put nickel in your belt loop or your snap on your jeans, it has to release less than 0.5 micrograms of nickel per centimeter squared for nickel that or metal that touches the skin, and 0.2 for that's one that's implanted. When you use when you have a very low amount of nickel in the metal, you don't make people allergic. Okay. And it's not a problem for your earrings and stuff, but when you want to have a knee replacement, you don't want to be allergic to nickel. Yeah. And then there's the other thing about the belts. Oh, okay. Yeah, this is a good fashion tip. We're going to end it off here. If you are allergic to nickel, listeners, and you can't wear belts because you have the belt loop and it's made out of the cheap metal, you can go buy 10 belts, try to get European brands because they have the nickel directive. And then you can buy a test called the nickel spot test, which is dimethylgloxamine. You put a little drop of this liquid on a Q-tip, you rub the metal for a minute. If it turns pink, there's too much nickel. So you can find which belt doesn't release the nickel, and then you won't have a rash from your belt loop.
Okay, so let's move on to another really actually fascinating and very big topic, question about fragrance. And
yes.
This is and I think fragrance actually probably needs its whole own episode. But we're going to try and kind of pivot to a little more bite size. So it's actually fascinating. It's something I didn't realize. Can a fragrance be more hypoallergenic? And are there some fragrances, fragrance molecules that are cause more allergies?
So we already talked about this. So there's 24, right? So that's what's so we identified 24, 26 too. The 26 were banned, but 26, and then the EU has actually identified another, I think it's 70 or 80, I can't remember, which they haven't put into law yet. And a lot of those are natural based fragrances. So you can make a fragrance without any of those 26 plus the other 72. You make a fragrance to put into a product, right? Okay. So you make, again, when you talk about Chanel, like the Chanel has 30 ingredients to make it smell like Chanel number 5. So in those 30, you can pick, well, I don't know what they do, but you can pick 30, and those 30 cannot be part of those problematic group, not the 24 or the 72. Okay. So you can make a fragrance that is not allergic. And I want to give you,
people love, I like to have a little bit of fragrance in my product, especially the body wash, because I go into the shower and it's a little bit of a meditative moment for me, and we know I'll inhale and smell this like nice steam coming out in the shower.
It enhances, we call that enhancing the user experience. Yes.
Yes.
That's the cosmetic speak. So I'll give you a good example of that. So I do things with Bioderma because I think they're an amazing company, and they have a shower gel that is fragranced. And so I asked them they didn't give me the exact ingredients, but I said, does your fragrance that's in your shower gel have any of the 26 plus the other 72, 80? Do they have any of these ones that have been flagged by the EU and also associations like myself, Contact Dermatitis Association? And they said no. So their fragrance in their shower gel is technically, I don't love the term hypoallergenic, but yes. So you can make a fragrance that is hypoallergenic. And I want to end with, I don't think the AI episode has come out yet, but one of the great things about AI for skincare is you're going to be able to put in all of these fragrance molecules that are problematic and have this AI algorithm produce a fragrance for you that is not allergenic.
That's fascinating.
Yeah. So I think we're going to end off with some fun stuff in our bags. Although we don't have much in our bags. We thought it would be a heavy episode, so we thought we'd find
it's fascinating, and it's also interesting because it's ever changing. We can do another episode in a year, and there's going to be a lot more information and a lot more things happening
probably in the US. Yes.
Yes.
Well, in my bag I just have lipstick. I don't really carry a lot of things. I don't want my sunscreen in my car getting benzene, so
I know.
No, I'm just
now we know.
Yeah, when I do travel with sunscreens,
the beach. What do you do?
First of all, when I travel with sunscreen in my bag, I have powders. And when I do it in the beach, you just have to make sure it's not left out in the sun. Got to keep it cool in the shade.
But our mineral sunscreen won't have benzene in it.
No, they don't. And I don't even want to get on benzene and sunscreens because it's from the benzophenol. What is that one? I can't. Oxybenzo. So
yeah, I mean, I lately have been carrying around a powder sunscreen, like with a brush.
Yeah,
the one all-in-one.
Those are great.
So great because I wear makeup. So if I want to reapply, if I'm going out in the middle of the day and I want to reapply my sunscreen, I don't want some cream. So I actually always have that in my bag, especially since working more closely with skin.
Well, the powders
and lipstick too. You know what? When we first put out our pictures for the podcast, the one question I got, somebody asked what lipstick I was wearing.
Exactly. There you go.
I love the lipstick.
I don't have. Marla tells me I never wear enough lipstick, so I've got my lipstick here, my Gucci lipstick that she gave me as a gift. Okay, we're droning on. We're gonna thank you so much. I hope you found this very informative. It's very dear to my heart, and I think it's important. And we'll see you next time on Skin to It. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Catch us every Thursday for a fresh, exclusive dose of Skin to It. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss out on the skincare wisdom. We will guide you through the maze of skincare and cut through that noise to help you achieve your healthiest skin. Loving our podcast? Share your thoughts and help us grow by leaving a review on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Until we meet again, see you soon on Skin to It, your guide to healthy skin. Skin to It, a podcast brought to you by Bioderma.